Sup flappers, welcome back to another video, and sorry I was not able to get a video out yesterday because I was moving, as most of you would know. Some of you don't, but that's okay. Today I want to talk about something else, alright? ICD. If you guys don't know what ICD is short for internal cooldown. And this is very important because as we've gotten to the Inazuma regions, we've started to see a lot more ICD gating certain units from their full potential. Now, I want to dive a little deeper than just talking about the surface level of ICD, what it is, what it does, who it limits, but I want to dive a little more as to understanding why it's in the game and how it's going to affect the game going forward, especially in certain units and the potential they have to react with other units. Now, it's not really a question that ICD is currently used to balance characters while also allowing said characters to adopt new playstyles. Now you guys might be like, what the hell are you talking about? Adopt new playstyles? Isn't it detracting them from current potential playstyles? Yes, it's MiHoYo's way of forcing us into playing these characters in new ways as opposed to just sticking with the old. For example, Yoimiya is a fast-hitting on-hit pyro archer, right? But if there were nothing to restrict her to certain reactions, she would simply be too strong with how fast she can cause vaporize and melt. You guys can attribute this to MiHoYo again being like, well, that's MiHoYo's fault for not designing a unit that's unique enough to not need these type of limitations, because I really want to play a character like Yoimiya with vaporize and melt, but understand that most people only think that because vaporize and melt deals the most damage. You get to see the biggest numbers, and she also hits very fast. So who wouldn't want a machine gun who can shoot tank bullets, if that makes any sense, right? It's just a wet dream for a lot of damage per screenshot players. But you see, before you go any further with that, please answer a question here, all right? So, a question for everybody who is watching. Do you think MiHoYo should be balancing the game around C0 or C6? Now, a follow-up question to that would be, which one do you think they are currently balancing the game around? So, for those who don't know, currently C6 Yoimiya is already being used by Leviathans more than C6 Hu Taos. A lot of them are starting to make the change from Hu Tao over to Yoimiya, which speaks volumes for Yoimiya's full potential. The main reason being conditions. The conditions to activate and use Yoimiya at her peak at C6. It's just far less than Hu Tao comparatively at C6. So one can say by definition that this was an unfair comparison, but I really don't think so. This is highlighting a whole nother issue, which is that C6 and constellations in general are just starting to flow together much better with current new gen units comparatively to the older characters. If you want to look at a wacky constellation, you can always just look to Zhao, alright? Zhao at C0 being a pretty solid unit overall, but his C1, C2, C4 just feel like they're gateways to keep you from going to C6, because once you get to C6, holy smokes, this character starts to become one of the best units in the game. And this is what I mean with older units constellations doesn't seem to flow. There's C0 and then there's C6 and everything in between. But nowadays characters start to feel like C0, C1, C2 feels actually connected with C4 and then eventually C6. So honestly, I just don't feel Zhao's constellation flows as well as someone like Raiden Shogun. But back to the comparison between Hu Tao and Yoimiya. Hu Tao does not inherently have any ICD issues. She flows very well with Xingqiu and is currently still paired best with Xingqiu. But with that comparison, let me remind you that Hu Tao is considered the best single target pyro DPS by many at C0. So the same comparison made at C0 with Hu Tao and Yoimiya would have Hu Tao emerging as the victor. Which brings us back to our previous question. Do you think MiHoYo is balancing the game around C0 or C6? And with my example, I hope that it's shown you that the answer is actually both. The thing about ICD is that people oftentimes say that it is a lazy way of balancing the game, and in a sense, they would be correct. It's a way for MiHoYo to gate powers from these units by removing the accessibility of certain features. In this case, it would be Vaporize and Melt for Yoimiya, which is a way to hold her back in lower constellations just enough so that as you get more constellations, you will eventually be able to access Yoimiya's full potential without the reliance of needing heavy vaporize and melt reactions, which essentially is what free-to-play players use to get as much power they can into their units. Think about it. A C6 Ganyu does not heavily rely on reactions. Just as a lot of C6 5-star units, they themselves are the entire army. They don't really need to rely on any more reactions. Of course, some characters such as Hu Tao, you would want to throw in some reactions, vaporize, melt to get that big damage number, but the consistency threshold for these units at C6 just goes up by a mile. So currently, with the release of Toma, it is quickly known that the ICD issue is going to affect units not only in the main DPS position. With this, it's clear that MiHoYo is designing new characters with the fear of them being too strong, and this is only possible because we have units who currently are used as baselines. And I'm just gonna say it straight out, ICD, or internal cooldowns, is used to separate the free-to-play players from the whales and leviathans. It's a tool to further the gap between C0 and C6 units. It's something MiHoYo is using to incentivize pulling for a couple lower constellations to gain more functionality into units. This is because MiHoYo has found out that if they make C1 or C2 enticing enough, then players are more likely to convince themselves that getting them are worthwhile, even if it means selling off some Tesla stocks to get it. Unlike the earlier months of Genshin, where it was C6 or bust, players are now smarter than ever when it comes to optimizing units and constellations. It's gotten to the point of a science, and ICD is just a way for MiHoYo to add more restrictions to make C6 still a good investment for whales and leviathans. Many players are now stopping at C2 or C3 and is content with the amount of power that is unlocked. So MiHoYo, of course, is going to make it a little uncomfortable for players who would want to be efficient with power investments. Why would they make C0 units with these amazing reactions so plentiful, where C1, C2 constellations have already been very good in value? This is the thing when it comes to balancing the game, right? When you're trying to balance C0 and you're trying to balance C6 at the same time for every new unit, and note that you are not able to nerf units after release, it gets very tricky. So it's easier for MiHoYo to just gate players right out the get-go and lock power behind higher constellations, with the case of Yoimiya being the example. Alright, so with that said, leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. I'm actually really curious as to see how the community is reacting with all the ICD restrictions that MiHoYo has been putting on the Inazuma characters. Not to say that they're useless or they're bad or just laziness, but it's definitely something they're doing to try to get more profits. So I'm gonna see you guys later in the live stream, and until then, I wish you all to stay safe and peace.